Who are the greatest, the best professional wrestlers of all time? Derek Diablo, Double Diablo, Diablo TV. Like and subscribe, do things you're supposed to do. And in pro wrestling, let's go back. I'm about to turn 51 years old. I'm born in 1974. I'm watching pro wrestling since before I can remember. My grandfather, Abuelo Frank, he rest in peace, and my uncle Frankie, they would be watching it. I'm talking about going back to the early 70s when I'm born, right? So I would be seeing them watch wrestling, and my uncle would used to do the wrestling moves on me, and then I would do it to other kids and try to hurt the other kids, do it to my little brother, that sort of thing. So I've been in pro wrestling my whole life, and I was too young to go because this is before like the whole WWE made it big. So Dusty Rhodes, Miami Convention Center, Florida championship wrestling for Florida, Gordon Solie, Miami Beach Convention Center. My grandfather, my uncle would go, but back in those days you didn't bring kids to wrestling. It was more violent, it was more of an adult thing, more like what ECW would become, basically. Feel me? So let's say I'm in pro wrestling my whole life, and then I went to pro wrestling school under Rusty Brooks, who, rest in peace, who was disciple of Eddie Graham and Professor Malenko. You got Ox Baker, you understand? So I got lineage in pro wrestling. I went in 1998, but my intention was always to put the shoot wrestling together, Japanese style. To that end, I've developed my own wrestling organization, FSW, Florida Shoot Wrestling, although I haven't had a full show yet, just done little bits and putting it together, and I've met with investors and everything like that. Hopefully I'll be able to do my first FSW show this year. Stay tuned for that. But let's go back to the beginning, and you can't write it down, no top 10 or nothing like that, because it'd be too many. Let's say the first type of magazine I ever got, when my parents started letting me buy a magazine at the store, you feel me, was wrestling magazines. First type of book I bought in the school book fair when I was in first grade. The first type of books I was attracted to was monster books. First grade, Frankenstein, Dracula, those type of things. I could draw them as a kid. I could draw them. I've always been artistic. I could always draw. Boom. So that was the first type of books I ever bought on my own, first grade. And when I started being able to buy my own magazines, they were wrestling magazines. And the Pro Wrestling Illustrated, I don't have them anymore, but I look at the covers, I see people talking to Bill after I had those. So it was like horror to me, because they were black and white newsprint, but I remember there was Dusty Rhodes and Abdullah the Butcher, hitting them stabbing them with the pencil and blood, and then black and white blood. It looked like the horror movies. So going back, I was raised on Dusty Rhodes. Everybody who knew Dusty Rhodes was the man. Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, those were big to me. But so another thing that's important about South Florida, I think we were unique in this regard, as I see, is that we had a lot of different regional wrestlings that other people didn't get. So we had WWF, which is New York territory at the time, you feel me? Because it was still WWF versus NWA. WWF hadn't got quite as big yet. I was raised more on NWA, which would be Florida Championship Wrestling for Florida, as well as Georgia Championship Wrestling. But then we would also get World Class Championship Wrestling. Texas, we would get WWF, and then we get bits of other kinds, right? We didn't get the whole Mid-Atlantic one. We didn't get too much AWA, and we didn't get a California territory. But just between NWA and WWF, Florida, Georgia, Texas, all those being up under the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance banner, and WWF, bomb. So, and I used to play with my action figures, my G.I. Joe action figures. I used to play them as wrestling. And so that's this. I didn't play my Star Wars ones because they were just different. But with the G.I. Joe ones were the ones that could move more. So I remember like Zartan, my action figure of Zartan was Mr. Wrestling 2. So Mr. Wrestling 2, I used to like him a lot. Talking about my favorite wrestlers as I grew up. Barry Windham, Tommy Wildfire Rich, Blackjack Mulligan, I liked him. That's Barry Windham's father, but, I wasn't so crazy, but I did like him. You got, of course, Andre the Giant. I remember when Hulk Hogan was still a heel. I remember before he turned, into babyface, the Hulk Hogan, everybody know. I was in 5th grade when that whole rock and wrestling connection happened. It was the biggest thing. Pro wrestling was the biggest thing. And I used to be hurting all the other children my whole life. And anytime the adults were around, I'd be doing wrestling moves. And I remember I had a neighbor that parents would be doing whatever they're doing. We're supposed to be playing together. I'm trying to hurt all the other kids. I could always beat all the other kids up. And I remember trying to break there was a kid that lived in my same little block of houses They're from New York. Dana and Adam, and I think Dana was a little brother. I mean, oh yeah, let me do a wrestling movie. I remember putting him in a Boston Crab and trying to break his back all the way. But kids are flexible, it didn't work. Another time I think I took that kid, I used to abuse all the kids, bully all the kids, beat up all the kids in my neighborhood. I remember grabbing him by the feet and swinging him around and going next to the building of my house and smashing his head into the wall. I'd try to break people's skulls. I mean, my brother, I'd be hurting everybody with pro wrestling moves. I remember there was a Daniel Tate, I think his name was, that had killed his brother doing pro wrestling moves, black lad. And that was a big case when I was a kid and stuff like that. Boom, going on. Missing Link. I always thought was cool. But he was considered almost more like a jobber. Missing Link was badass. I liked him a lot. You had Iron Mike Sharp. And he was like a jobber, enhancement talent, whatever you say, losers. But he's badass too. I kind of liked him as well. Big John Studd. Then the action figures came out. They were big rubbery ones. And I had those. I had Hulk Hogan. I had Big John Studd, for sure. And then around those days you had Ken Patera. He was pretty cool. You had SD Jones. One of my action figures was SD Jones. Can't remember who. Ken Patera, SD Jones, Special Delivery Jones, Junkyard Dog. Oh, I had Junkyard Dog stretchy toy too. British Bulldogs. I loved British Bulldogs. Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith. Some of my G.I. Joes were them. Ooh, then going to the Texas, you got Bruce Brody. I wasn't so crazy about him, but I liked him. He's a scary guy, you know what I mean? The Assassins. Ooh, Assassin number 1, you know. He was scary. Like, he was a scary guy. And the way he would talk, and there's a brilliant promo of Mr. Wrestling 2 and Assassin. That's a brilliant promo, one of the best. Ooh, going back into those times. Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo. When I was in 5th grade, they won the tag team titles. Those were my very favorite. That was my favorite tag team. Tommy Wildfire Rich. I don't know if I said him already, but I used to like him a lot. And these guys, I'll be seeing them in the magazine and stuff. Road Warriors. For Legion of Doom, Road Warriors. That was the best. So really in 5th grade, 1984, was when wrestling got to the next level. But I always liked NWA better, which became WCW. Sting for sure. I didn't like Kevin Sullivan so much. A lot of these people I've come to respect a lot more in the modern age. Harley Race, I didn't really care about him that much. And let's say the Briscoes and stuff is before me. Terry Funk. I didn't know so much Dory Funk. I didn't care about him so much. But I remember when I was a kid, it was the hardest I ever had laughed. I think at that point in my life, it was that Terry Funk. I haven't really looked this back up again, but Terry Funk had put a plastic bag over Ric Flair's head. And and I always knew wrestling was fake. I always knew it was a work. Some people, they watch pro wrestling and they find out that it's fake or whatever like that, and then they lose interest in it. I always knew it because I was always hurting people, and I started doing even before I started doing martial arts, I was already hurting the other kids. And I was always trying to do those moves on people. And you can't throw somebody in the ropes and they run back against the will. And it's not easy to pick somebody up over your head and do all these moves to them. I would be trying to do it to the other kids, but they curl up and you can't just pick somebody up over your head. So you'd have to get somebody to let you do those moves. So I knew that pro wrestling, because since I was violent, I was hurting people, hurting the other children since I could remember. Especially by 5 years old, I got my first street fight in 1979. Billy McCarthy, his brother, made me fight because the other guys, Andy and Seth, that lived on my same block, they made me fight him next door house, and I beat him. You don't know how to fight at 5 years old, and then biting him. You feel me? So then, first day of first grade, I put a spoon fork in my mouth, and bit the kid next to me in the neck and drew blood. 5 years old, I was annihilating all the other children. And then I was taught I had to be the toughest kid in my neighborhood, so I would beat up all the kids in my neighborhood. I was always the toughest kid in my neighborhood, basically bully all the other kids in my neighborhood, and try to do pro wrestling stuff on them. Boom. So we're going to have to end it, and I can go on with it. Let's just start. Let's say I'm born in 1974, so 70s up to 1984 or so, and then a bit beyond that. Lex Luger, he was pretty cool. I liked him. And as far as those real early days, obviously Dusty Rhodes was the main man, and I'm gonna leave it there. American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, #1 best of all time.